Hello, I'm James Cridland, the radio futurologist, and every week or couple of weeks I send out a newsletter all about the future of radio and radio's interoperability, interconnectedness with technology and all of that kind of stuff. And this is it from February the 9th, 2023. The BBC pulling its radio stations from Radioplayer and the RAJAR figures. In a potential act of oblivion, that's a joke related to a picture which you can't see, the BBC has pulled its stations off Radioplayer, the cross-app platform that it helped fund. UK listeners now have to download the BBC Sounds app instead. Now, Radioplayer was the thing I spent my last few months at the BBC occasionally working on, and I remember presenting to the heads of commercial radio in Tim Davies' office, demonstrating how the player might look. It was only a web player at the time. Well, actually, it was a keynote document. And demonstrating how it might all work as well. Anyway, Radioplayer was run very successfully by Michael Hill, and the much admired service is now in a number of different countries with integrations with car manufacturers, smart speaker platforms, as well as apps, and it's just launched in Finland as it happens. Now, the BBC has, in the past, pulled some of its podcasts from general release for the first 30 days in a trial, open inverted commas, close inverted commas, that was announced more than 12 months ago, and which a BBC press person tells me is still ongoing with no public end date. It pulled all of its podcasts from Google Podcasts when that launched, complaining that it didn't want Google's player to appear in the results instead of its own. I also hear from podcast commissioners that any success on third-party platforms like Apple Podcasts or Spotify don't matter when the BBC is judging the success of shows. After all of this, in Q4 22, 188 million plays within BBC Sounds were to on-demand content, excluding music mixes. The corporation also saw 259 million podcast downloads on third-party platforms. In other words, podcasts don't perform nearly as well on BBC Sounds. That 188 million figure is made up of both podcasts and catch-up radio, after all. Now, the reason the BBC has done this is, of course, data. After I worked out the arcane anti-pattern of actually requesting it, I was able to examine the BBC's data that it had collected on me to discover that it gets data every second I'm using the BBC Sounds app, even collecting data for 10 minutes after I stop using it. To force listeners to download an app is understandable if you're a commercial radio station where you'd like to monetize the visit as much as possible. I'm not sure it's the right strategy, but commercial radio can do what it likes because it lives and dies by the revenue it makes. The BBC is different, though. Its funding is guaranteed through a legally mandated TV licence fee, one that gets single mums threatened with prosecution for not paying, and was responsible for 50,000 prosecutions for non-payment in 2021 alone. 50,000. And if nothing else, that should mean that its output is made available to the UK public in whatever form the UK public want to listen, rather than forcing a download of a specific app. That truly would be a public service. It was the quarterly radio figures in the UK earlier this month. Matt Deegan has written a long post looking at the numbers, so too has Adam Bowie. What I get out of the data is a continuing fall for BBC local radio in England, down by 15% in year-on-year reach and down by 11.9% in year-on-year hours. That is ahead of the programming sharing that they're about to start doing. What I also see is Boom Radio, which is an oldies service, more than doubling their total reach, up 119% year-on-year, and doing even better in terms of hours, up 137% year-on-year. Now, normally, those don't go up that way. Newer listeners tend to be less committed, so normally you see reach going up more than hours. But of course, the heritage presenters are a major part of the offering on Boom Radio, but I also wonder whether the music mix for the station is unspotifyable. That is, difficult for any algorithm to quite match the kind of service that Boom is. I wonder whether it's a relatively unique format in that case. And LBC, the station of choice when I was in the car recently in the UK, continues to do excellently. I do think there's a big difference between the future prospects for speech radio when compared to music-intensive formats, but the RAJARs don't seem to agree with me, because Heart, which is an AC station in the UK, has done really well as well. Elsewhere, Fun Radio in France has been fined more than 11 million euro. That's more than 12 million US dollars. Well, not quite, sort of nearly 12 million US dollars. Anyway, they've been fined for encouraging listeners to tell audience researchers that they listen to Fun Radio. Some fun facts about this. All of this happened in 2016, which shows the speed of this sort of thing. They did mention this on air more than 100 times. More than 100 times. Their audience increased in a very unusual fashion as a result. Competitor NRJ will get 10 million euro in damages. And Fun Radio is now owned by M6, who claim that they had nothing to do with it anyway, and M6 plan to appeal. After ceasing programming on 12:15 a.m. with some beautifully produced audio, Absolute Radio turned their transmitters off one by one on the 25th of January. I linked to a recording of Moorside Edge being turned off. I used to live just over the valley from those transmitters. And I also noticed with some satisfaction that the switch was thrown at the end of the looped announcement, not during it. Bravo, Bauer, again. That said, Bauer could apparently be fined for ceasing to provide the service. It'd be interesting to see what Ofcom really do at the end of that, given that the UK government has been pretty clear that it wants people to leave the AM waveband. There's been a rebrand for KPCC in Los Angeles. The radio station will now be known as LA IST 89.3. It's the same slightly unwieldy brand that's used for the company's podcast and online services. Call signs, to me, seem really anachronistic in 2023, although I guess that one benefit is at least that they form a unique ID for any radio station that uses one, and so therefore at least that's handy for a smart speaker. But yes, LA IST 89.3, so much more obviously to do with LA than KPCC was. Hot on the heels of their signing of Ken Bruce, Bauer's Greatest Hits Radio has fallen back on tried and tested biscuit content. I link to a tweet in my newsletter today at james.crid.land, which reads, "What's the worst biscuit to have with a cup of tea?" Dee Ford, the head of the UK's Bauer Radio Group, is to leave the company after 35 years, it was announced. Now, in the mid-1990s, she was my managing director for a short while. She was one of those people you admired greatly and you really wanted to do your best for. So I don't know if it's officially a retirement, but if it is, happy retirement, Dee. She still is one of the good people. And let's finish with two fun facts. Fun fact number one, twice as many people use teletext in Norway than use Twitter, which is a great stat. And another fun fact, YouTuber Mr. Beast has comparable hours of viewing across his video to a top 5 Netflix show. Now, this newsletter is fueled by coffee, by you buying me coffee, if we're going to be strictly accurate. So thank you to Craig Young for the 5 coffees. He says, appreciate the news in your newsletter and even share to my members on occasion. Thank you, Craig. Phil Riley, one of the brains behind Boom Radio, has also bought 5 coffees, as did Dan Wright, the excellent person behind Absolute Radio's tribute to 12:15 before it was turned off. Thank you, Dan. I appreciated your audio. I appreciate your coffee even more. And also Alan Clement also bought a coffee. All very kind of you all, so thank you for doing that. Thank you also to Richard Hilton, to James Masterton, and to Brun Audio Consulting for your ongoing support of my newsletter and of this podcast. I'm very grateful to you. If you'd like to support my work in any way, you can buy me a coffee. Just be a member to give regularly, or just give a one-off coffee, or 5 if you like. buymeacoffee.com/JamesCridland is where to go for that. Or if you're using one of those fancy new podcast apps, then hit the boost button and send me some sats. That would be a lovely thing. Now, also on this page, I'm just hitting refresh because I just added where I'll be over the next couple of months. Because, you know, when I started recording this as a podcast, where I'd be over the next couple of months was at home because there was some form of pandemic on here, at least. I don't know if that happened where you were. Anyway, it turns out that I'm travelling again. So where am I? I'm at the IAB Audio Summit in Sydney on March the 1st. Looking forward to that. A Podcast Movement Evolutions in Las Vegas on March the 6th to the 11th. I'm looking forward to the Podcast Movement Evolutions bit, not necessarily the Las Vegas bit. Radio Days Europe in Prague, March 25th to the 30th. The NAB show in mid-April, which is in Vegas again. The New Zealand Podcast Summit in mid-May in Auckland. The Podcast Show 2023 in London at the end of May. And Radio Days North America in early June, which is in Toronto. Anyway, my contact details, if you're there too, it'd be lovely to catch up. I'm james@crid.land, which is also what you can search Mastodon for if you're on there, james@crid.land. If you search that, then you will find my Mastodon account, which is james@bne.social, Brisbane, of course, bne.social. That's where I am on Mastodon these days, and that's a lovely thing. My professional website has has more details about who I am and what I do and whether I can help you further. You'll find that at james.cridland.net. And until next time, keep listening.